I want to first say thank you to our host. One is Pillsbury, who underwrites our entire CEO Chick Chat series, which is the most incredible interview series. They've been an incredible supporter to us. We're normally in D.C., but today we're doing something a little bit different. We're out here in Tyson's Corner, and I want to say thank you to Morgan Stanley. Well, how many people have had a chance to even look at the book or read it yet? It's an incredible story. And Carol has an amazing story. You're an iconic figure here in Washington, D.C. You are very well known.
Thank you.
I've heard about you ever since I moved here from Texas. And I always thought, that's one of the people I want to get to know, because she's got this amazing story. And I pestered you.
Sometimes you don't want to have an amazing story, but if you end up having one, write a book.
I like that. I like that, Adam. If you got an amazing story, you need to write a book. So your story goes back. How many people have heard of Nathan's in Georgetown? Pretty much most everybody here. It's one of the most famous places here in Washington, D.C. One of the restaurants where you're supposed to go and hang out. It's one of the nightclubs, the night scenes after late night out. An incredible, incredible story.
But that's sort of my midpoint, because I started working when I was 18 years old. I never went to college. I moved out of my parents' home when I was 18 because I'd always wanted to be a journalist, and it was 1968, which I know ages me, or at least dates me. And the campuses were erupting. There wasn't this enormous pressure that we feel today that you have to go right from high school into college. And I had an opportunity to become like a cub, an entry-level reporter for United Press International in Washington. And it was the same year Richard Nixon was being inaugurated for the first time. So Washington was tremendously exciting. In that, there were demonstrations almost every other week. The streets were erupting with tear gas and rock-throwing incidents. And for a young reporter, it was just an amazing place to be. And that started a career that went from UPI to Time magazine. Time moved me up to New York. Again, entry-level corporate trainee. I came in by Time magazine, but spent a year as a trainee within the whole Time Inc. corporation. And just as my year was up and I would have gone back to Time as a staff writer, Walter Cronkite hired me to write the CBS Evening News. I was 22 years old. It seemed perfectly natural to me for a 22-year-old to be writing the CBS Evening News.
So you were one of those avant-garde women who saw the world through that new lens.
I don't know what, you know, I look back on it and I've seen it through many different lenses, because I've seen it that way. I've also had to see it through the eyes of the people who were the old guard at CBS, who not only was Walter bringing in this incredibly young person, but it was the first woman to write the evening news. So that at the same time, it was, there was some abrasiveness toward me at first, but I never felt an overbearing kind of sexism. As soon as I did my work, and when I did my work well, I felt I was on the even playing field with everybody else. We were all there to do a job, and when I performed, that was all that mattered. I stayed with Walter all through Watergate, Nixon's resignation, and the fall of Saigon, and then I took a year off. I ended up, this is another story altogether, I ended up in the West Indies crewing on a sailboat. But I came back to work, and I went into a completely different division of news. I ended up in talk TV, which was just emerging in the 80s as this sort of new form of television news. I went with a show called Night Watch, which was on CBS. It was hosted by Charlie Rose. It was on in the middle of the night. And it just seemed so strange to me that my job was not to go out into the field and get a story, but to get somebody to come into the studio and do an interview and make news that way. But as I said, it was a burgeoning industry, and it hasn't stopped growing. I stayed with Charlie 4 or 5 years. We won an Emmy Award together doing Charlie Manson. I went on to other pursuits in television. I was the Washington bureau chief of USA Today, the television show, which was a disaster, but I learned a lot, as you do from disasters. And I became a producer for both David Brinkley at This Week and Ted Koppel at Nightline. And then from that, had a baby, did some work with the National Gallery of Art and Carter Brown directing films. When Spencer started kindergarten, I took a job that really intrigued me. It was to be a producer for Larry King. And it intrigued me because my whole career up till then had been in hard news. And here was this great fun show that I actually loved watching, where on any given night, anything could be happening with Larry. So I was delighted to be going to Larry King Live. Now, to backtrack, in 1977, 76, I met Howard Joynt. He owned Nathan's in Georgetown. A very exciting character to be. I mean, he was in every way larger than life. I was 26, he was 38. He was, to me, a fully formed man. I was still renting my apartment and sleeping in furniture from LL Bean, and really didn't own much more than a couple of suitcases and some clothes and a sleeping bag, even though I made loads of money. I was just very happy being a Rolling Stone, but Howard was a very established person, and I was attracted to that in so many ways. We fell madly in love. 2 weeks after we met, we were living together at the Madison Hotel, and we were together for the next 20 years until he died suddenly of pneumonia in February of 1997. And I found out 2 weeks later that at Nathan's, which I had nothing to do with, that was his business, I had my own, he'd been under investigation for federal tax fraud, that the debt was $3 million, and that since I was in his will as his sole heir, and since I had signed our joint marital tax return, I was now the defendant. This is not what I expected to hear.
You know, it was really fascinating. When you read this book and you get to this, it is one of those moments where you find that you're like, you're reading, you're enamored, you're driven into the book, you just don't want to put it down. But you go through those moments, your stomach falls, you just get that knot in your stomach, your heart races a little bit, you
I remember the feeling.
But there for the grace of God, go
well,
I. And I
so
have
many
to share
graces.
with you, you know, my situation is a little different, but that I moved here in 2002 following the death of my brother and took over his IT company on behalf of my family. I was not an owner because it was passed to my mother. And during the time that I was leading the company, I invested my own personal money into the company, over probably about $15,000. I was audited for 1 year, and of which that year I had put in about $6,000 is what they had pulled up. And it was a business investment. I had receipts, I could prove it, and they said because I was not an owner of the company, I could not write it off as a business expense. It was a gift. And it was a lot more money. I had to pay $6,000 in taxes on the money that I had invested in this company, even though it was proven business expenses.
What's the message here? It is the message I give over and over to people who read my book. Regardless of whether you're a Gen Xer or a baby boomer, regardless of whether you're not married or you've been married forever, or you're about to get married, or if you're a man or a woman, know your liability.
Absolutely. I think, sometimes you don't even know what the questions are, though. That's the problem.
Well,
you don't even know. My accountant is here today, so I do ask a lot of questions, but I wouldn't have known that I needed to ask the question.
Well, you asked the question, tell me my entire liability.
Right.
Look at this situation and what's my entire liability. I went in with my husband, ironically, a year before he died because he didn't want to do a will because he thought wills were bad luck.
I think that's very common. I think a lot of people say the
Turned
day I
out to
signed
be
my
right.
will. Yeah.
But went in to do a will, and it just seemed to make complete sense that I would inherit everything from him, he would inherit everything from me. Well, my husband owned a small business that I knew nothing about. I didn't know they had 2 sets of books. I didn't even know that was standard operating procedure in most saloons. I didn't think that if anything happened to him, I would get the bad side of Nathan's. I figured if anything happened to him, I could just sell it, and that's what he always told me. I said, what do I do if you get hit by a truck? He said, sell it as fast as you can. Well, with this tax fraud case, I couldn't sell it. Now, when I went into those lawyers, when they first unloaded on me that this had been going on and that I was the defendant, I was like, wait, how can I be the defendant? I didn't have anything to do with this. I don't even know what it is he did. I wouldn't even know how to do what it is he did How can I be the defendant? Well, because you're his heir. You signed the tax returns, and on the tax return, your joint income was underreported. I said, well, we had an accountant do it.
And that was the thing that was really interesting. Number one, I can't keep one set of books. I've told my husband, I said, if I overdraw my bank account, I think it's a banking problem if I have more checks than I have money. You know, I think it's how you look at it. But, you know, number one is I agree with you. How can you keep two sets of books? I mean, I think that's very hard.
Ask most saloon owners, and I think if you get them in an honest moment, they'll explain it to you. I never did.
And then, but your accountant is also filling out your tax returns, but I imagine they're just doing it based on the information you provide them.
Well, that was exactly what Howard's accountant said, and I had to take him at his word. I'll never know. But he said I was dealing with the numbers Howard gave me.
I thought it was so fascinating in the book, and you wrote so well about the day you prepared to go meet with the attorneys following his death, and you get dressed.
I got dressed up in my best suit.
I
Wouldn't
know.
You?
I'm going to look like, you know, I'm married to the successful man. I'm going to represent my family and my husband.
Me too. I was going to represent me. I earned good money. I dressed well, and I was channeling, you know, Jackie Kennedy as my widow mentor. So I put on a very good black suit, my best pair of black shoes. I took my best handbag, and I wore a discreet but nice pair of pearls. And when they called me in, and all this drama unloads on me. And after I tell them that, you know, I didn't know anything about this, they said, and it was a woman who said this, a woman lawyer. She said, well, there is a code in the tax law called innocent spouse. And I said, that's it. That's me. What is it? You know, and she said, well, you know, if the spouse couldn't have known what was going on, they get absolved of guilt. I said, that's me. That's it. She said, well, you wouldn't stand a chance. And I said, why? She said, well, look at you. You had to know.
Yeah,
and I
so
was
appearances,
like, look at me. You know, I mean, I'll tell you this. My next meeting with lawyers, after I fired those lawyers and hired lawyers who believed in my innocence, I wore a pasta necklace my son made. I wore a schmata I got down in the Caribbean that had no shape ever, under any circumstances, and I had a whole pair of shoes that I ran over with the car. And that's how I went. You know, no makeup, no jewelry.
There is actually psychological studies that they had done on Dress for Success. There was a famous book that was out there a number of years ago. And this woman had written that, you know, my husband was going to the mechanic and he dresses like he's homeless. And she was really upset. He said, I dress that way because I get a better deal. And they said, actually, if you go to the mechanic and you look homeless, you get a better deal than if you come in. So really, how you dress.
I've learned so many lessons in that regard. It reminds me of the first few years when I'd have plumbers or contractors or air conditioning guys or whatever come to my house, or mechanics working on my car, and I'd try to play the widow card because I thought they'd be like, well, I'm gonna give this woman a break. And it was always just the opposite.
Right.
They just totally took me to the cleaners. So then I started just lying, even though it's not my ethic. I'm gonna have to show my husband this. Well, when my husband gets home, he's gonna take a look at it. I felt like an idiot. I thought, why can't I just be a widow and not get taken advantage of? But the world doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. It's kind of unfortunate. I think, you know, like we got that sucker thing on our
It's just like, why can't I dress as who I am and get the same deal I would get if I dress well? But you know, and it's so funny because my whole world was turned upside down, because before this happened, I would get dressed better because I was dressed better. If I was working and I was going into a restaurant, maybe I was taking a contact to lunch, well, obviously I was going to get a better table and treated better because I looked like, you know, I could pay the tab. And if I went in the way I dressed to go see my lawyers, I would have been put back by the kitchen door. It's just not.